And today, it's my privilege to launch a new series. And I really sense in my spirit that at the commencement of this new year, 2026, that God is going to call many of us by name. And as you read through the Bible, you can read on 7 separate occasions where God calls people by name. And he doesn't just simply call them once by their name, but rather he calls them twice. He says their name twice. And over the next 7 weeks, we're going to be looking at these individuals where God called them by name twice. And the first person that we're looking at today is a man by the name of Abraham. For Abraham and his wife Sarah, God spoke to them and said that you are going to have a son. You're going to have a child. Even though Abraham and Sarah were well past it, against all odds, God fulfilled his promise. Against everything that was stacked against Abraham and Sarah, they knew what it was to hold a son. The thing for Abraham, this great man of faith, was that his faith was put to the test. This afternoon, in a very simple way, all of us have put our faith to the test. And the faith was that that chair was going to hold your weight. Now, I don't know if anybody picked up that chair and checked the legs out and make sure it was really secure, everything else. I don't see anybody doing that this afternoon. You simply had the faith that that chair would be able to hold your weight. But we had to test it out, didn't we, by sitting down. And for Abraham, this incredible man of faith, this man who went when God told him to go, even though he didn't know where he's going. This man who believed God eventually that him and his wife Sarah would have a son. There came a time when their faith was tested. Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. What a moment that was. For God to speak to him through the angel of the Lord and speak to him right into the heart of Abraham. God spoke and told him to go and sacrifice Isaac, the promise, the one that God had promised unto Abraham and Sarah, and burn him as an offering unto God. What anguish must have filled the heart of Abraham, this father, because he greatly loved his son Isaac. He greatly loved him. And yet God spoke to him and said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to journey with Isaac. And I want you to go to the place that I'm going to show you. And there I want you to offer him as a sacrifice to me. If that had been me, I want to tell you that night I probably wouldn't have been able to sleep. And if I had been able to sleep, I'd have been sleeping for a very long time. Because I wouldn't have wanted to listen to what God had said. I wouldn't have wanted to obey what God said. And yet, incredible thing is that it says in verse 3 of chapter 22 that early the next morning, Abraham got up, he loaded his donkey, he took with him 2 of his servants and his son. He didn't argue with God. He didn't have a whole discourse with God. He simply got up early in the morning the next day. He got his son, he got his 2 servants, and they began the journey to go to the place where God was going to show them to go. They went in that direction. It wasn't just a short journey. The anguish in Abraham's heart must have been immense. I wonder today, are there people in this place and there's something of an anguish within you? Because maybe something that God has spoken and something that God has said to you, that some things that you need to lay down on the altar, some things that you need to be willing to sacrifice. And for some people, there's a sense, I believe today, that you've been on that journey for a long time and it's not just been a 5-minute journey. And the anguish has got deeper and deeper because you know what God has spoken and what God has said. And yet you're still on the journey. For you, it's been a long journey. It's been a long journey where you've carried an aching within your heart in what God has spoken over your life. Let me tell you this. It says this in James 1, verse 2 to 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I want to tell you that when we go through times of testing like Abraham did, what it does, it produces a muscle within us. It produces a backbone in our lives. And sometimes we just want to get away from this testing, want to get away from these trials and everything else. But God is saying, I want to teach you something through the trials and through the testing. I want to teach you perseverance to be able to keep on going. And the thing that God was testing Abraham in was this. Abraham, do you love me more than you love your son? Do you love me more than you love Isaac? The question was, do you love me more than you love this? Do you love me more than the promise that you're holding on to right now? Do you love me more than this? How much do you really love me? And sometimes God asks us that question. Do you love me more than this? Do you love me more than the promise that I've made over your life? Do you really, really love me? God was saying to Abraham, will you really trust me? Even though right now it doesn't make sense, why on earth would God ask Abraham to sacrifice the promise? Why would God ask Abraham to sacrifice his son? Will you trust me? And I believe that God asks us at times, will you trust me even though it doesn't make sense? Will you trust me even though you cannot comprehend it with your own understanding? But the Bible declares that his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. That we need to completely and absolutely trust God. And for Abraham, even though it didn't make sense, even though he probably didn't understand what was going on, he still trusted in God in an incredible way. I mean, it's seen in the journey that he takes. In verse 5 of Genesis chapter 22, he speaks to his servants, and they get to a point when he's going to leave his servants and go ahead with his son. And this is what he says: we will worship and then we will come back to you. He didn't say, I will come back. He said, we will come back to you. He was making a statement of faith, a statement of trust. I mean, we've read about it in Hebrews already, that he'd already said in Hebrews there that he actually believed that God could bring his son Isaac back from the dead. That was the faith that he had. And so, yes, God had told him this is what you need to do. And yet he was saying, I'm going to come back. We are going to come back together after we have made the offering. Here is Isaac. Whatever age he may have been, and there's a whole lot of different opinion on how old he may have been. And here was Isaac laden with the wood for the altar, for the sacrifice. Here was Abraham carrying the knife and the fire. And Isaac looked and said, where's the lamb? And this is what Abraham said in verse 8. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. What a way for him to trust in God, that the Lord will provide the lamb. But you know, the greatest trust that Abraham had in God is seen in the way that he built the altar. I can't begin to imagine what that must have been like for Abraham to build the altar. What it must have been like for him to take the sticks from off his boy's back and to place them on top of the altar. What a moment that must have been. The anguish, the heartache, the wondering of what's going to be. And he does that. What anguish there must have been as he proceeded to get Isaac and to bind him up and then place him on the altar. I can't behold what that looked like at that moment in time. I can imagine that Abraham was there. Must have been tears flowing down his face as he laid his son on the altar. I wonder if Isaac was saying, Father, what are you doing? What's all this about? I thought you loved me. I thought you treasured me. I thought you cherished me. And yet here you are laying me on the altar. I don't understand what's going on. I can imagine Abraham saying, I don't understand it as well. But this is what God has asked me to do. And I really love you, Isaac. But I love God more. And I'm trusting in him right now. But this is what God has asked me to do. And he takes a knife as Isaac is on the altar. And as he lifts up the knife, then he hears his name being called. Abraham. Abraham. At that point, Abraham was willing to sacrifice. He was willing to stop struggling and to just literally sacrifice in the way that God had asked him to sacrifice. You know, for some of us, we need to stop struggling and we need to sacrifice. Whatever that may mean to us, we need to be willing to sacrifice what God may ask us to sacrifice. We need to stop trying to reason and stop trying to resist and rather rest that which God has asked us to lay down. And Abraham was in that place of not struggling, but in that place of sacrifice. And as God spoke his name that day, Abraham, Abraham. I love the response of Abraham, this man of faith, and he simply responds, here I am. It was the response of a servant. It was the response of a man who submitted his life to the greatness of God. I want to say that our response always needs to be one of a servant, one who acknowledges him as our master, our great king, our great God, to do whatever he calls us to do. And what a sense of relief within Abraham must have been as he heard the words, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Whew. It would have been a relief. What a moment for Abraham to know that God has spoken and says, do not lay a hand on him. Do not slay him, but rather look around. And you know, sometimes God will test our faith. He will test our faith. Are we willing to lay it down? And for Abraham, God was really testing him. And it says in verse 12, to test him, to truly know that he feared God because he had not withheld his son, his only son. It was now time for Abraham to take his son off the altar. He could have argued with God. He said, well, God, I've journeyed all this way and I've done what you've asked me to do and you're just making a fool of me in front of my son. No, I'm not going to do that. But he didn't. He took him off the altar. And sometimes God asks us to lay some things down and then he asks us to take them back up again. I wonder today, the people in this place, and maybe God asked you to lay some stuff down, and you've laid it down, and then God is saying it's time to take it back up again. And it's almost like we're walking away from the altar, we're walking away from the sacrifice, and we're walking away, and God is calling us by name, whatever your name may be, and he calls you by name. And he says it's time to take it back up again. And for Abraham, that's what God was asking him to do. Take it up. Are you willing? Am I willing to take it up again? It's not so much time for that that feels like it's dead and buried, but rather it's time to to be resurrected. I believe that God wants to resurrect some things in our lives. Some things that we've laid down, and we've been willing to do that in obedience to what God has said. But God says this is time for resurrection. A resurrection of ministries that you've laid down. Resurrection of some hopes and some dreams that you placed on the altar. But right now you're saying, God, I'm willing to take it up again because He is the God who provides. I mean, God provided a ram there on the mountain that He was able to sacrifice on the altar. Today, God says, I will provide. I will provide. I will provide. For Abraham, God provided there on that mountain. And I believe that God is saying that for some of us this afternoon, if we're willing to do whatever God asks us to do, He says, I will provide. I will bless you. I mean, that's what God has said over Abraham's life, that I will bless you. I'll bless your offspring. They shall be as numerous as the sand. They shall be numerous as the stars in the sky. For Abraham, the test was over. I say this so often, but we all want a testimony, but we don't want the test. Can you imagine Abraham coming down from that mountain? First people that he met was his servants, and they're like, how did it go? Oh, wow. I've got to tell you about how it went. Imagine Isaac going, wait a minute, Dad, Father, don't you tell them, let me tell them what happened. Let me tell them from my perspective. For Abraham and for Isaac, they had a testimony to tell. And I want to speak it over people's lives this afternoon. You're going to have a testimony to tell of how God has done something incredible in and through your life because you came through the test. Not with the moans, but with a testimony that says, my God has provided. It's time to heed the voice of the one who says to us, Abraham, Abraham. You can change the name of Abraham for your name. And it may be, I don't know, this afternoon that God wants to stop some people in your tracks. And I really sense that within me, that there's people that have been obedient to lay it all down, but God's saying, that's great. And there's some people that you still need to lay some stuff down on the altar. But there are some people this afternoon, and I really believe that God is saying it's time to pick it up again. It's time to pick it up again. That which you thought was dead, that which you thought was finished, can begin to live again. Because He's a God who calls us by name. I wonder, can we stand together? Maybe Joe and the team will come back this afternoon.